How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Edgar Gonzalez, here. So I wanted to explore now is the SQL once and for all, but by reading it at the spec and to make sense of what the preface say and also the structure of the SQL, so then I can have a more practical approach of how to use this thing, this query language. So there is a very interesting course made by Gary Berhant, a software engineer that has previously worked at several companies and has shipped several products, not only on the web but also is on C, C++, as well as Python. And he is the author of this particular program, execute program. So learning, code it, and remember it. So he has 16 free sessions, and the whole point of this is have a practical approach, particularly on SQL. And then I'm looking for I got a different course or a different author to look at TypeScript, but in any case, in today's video is only the SQL, right, from the ground up. So SQL is so interesting, at least to me, because you have several flavors. You have Postgres, you have now SQLite, right? And at the end of the day, all of this stand on this particular query language, right? So whether if you're using Postgres for real, okay, that's interesting. Holy moly, for real? Okay. The world's most advanced open source relational database. So whether you have is Postgres or you use now SQLite, right? At the end of the day, both of them relies on this SQL database engine, right? SQL is the most used database engine in the world, and SQL is built in all mobile phones and most computers and comes bundled inside countless of other applications that people use every day. So if you want to take a look at this information, right, not only at the source code, which is interesting, it is open source like that. Interesting. Okay, all right, good. That's interesting. Ooh, makes sense. But yeah, whatever is you want to talk, I want to explore more about is Postgres, which is part of the flavors of. Let me see if you have now an about here section here. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Very, very interesting stuff. Okay. I'm gonna put all of them next to each other, so I don't have to navigate across all of them. So there you go. Oh, that's interesting. SQLite is made possible. Is made it possible in part by sponsor and the SQLite Consortium. Members including Visual DB, Bloomberg, Bentley, Spencify, Navigation Data Standards, and Engineering here as well. So if I navigate to this, will it open the tech at Bloomberg, pursuing the boundaries of innovation here. So we look decades ahead to create what our clients will someday need, and engineering value for our customers, technology developers, and quants. Quants. I get it. I need my quants. And cutting-edge technology and technology professional as it is. Explores our area of focus, C++, artificial intelligence, JavaScript, Python, UX, and so on and so forth. And well, Oh, you got a job here? Okay. So explore Bloomberg's career for that. You can say, hey, where are you looking right now? Even in Brasilia. Interesting. Okay, or Mumbai. So all the places there where they have early careers, right? For example, in let's say technology support, right? Yep, on the technology support, engineering and CTOs, right? Example, something like this, and I say, hey, I want to submit this, right? You say, hey, keep looking. So they're looking is for experience, I'm assuming. Senior software engineer, as you can see and understand all of that, right? Okay, so but most likely on New York and India. Something in Tokyo, but that's it. Is that a strategy? So public cloud engineering. So they actually hosting all of the. This is the annual salary. It's interesting because they describing is well, what it'll be, the amount of money that you're gonna get from. So they're transparent of that. The reference salary range is based on the company good faith, belief at the time of posting. Actual compensation may vary on such as geographic locations, work experience, market conditions, and this is also things that happens, right? It's at corporate level. So whatever you live, or your work experience, or the current market conditions, or the education and training and skill level that you have, we're gonna compensate you, right? So Bloomberg is actually using this, the SQLite, in Postgres, which is another flavor. But what I want to do in today's video, at least in the next 28 minutes, is to make sense of the ISO ISC 9075-1, the SQL framework, or the SQL spec, right? Read about the preface and understand the content in which this is made of. The TL of this is that. Because then, and after that, I want to look at the different flavors that we can have here on the SQL, whether it's Postgres or SQLite, all right? So let's get into this. As I read in the foreword here, right? I'm gonna make a quick recap here. Is in previous video I went through, look, what is ISO and ISC? So this is an international standard organization that was created in 1947. So we're talking about like 1 year after the World War II. And this has become as the organizations to organize all these standards. So here's when you find things, and let's go to the ISO. No? ISO, right? All right. So here is, so you got a couple norms. Let me see if they already have online browsing platforms and so on and so forth. No. What about on sectors? Okay. So, okay. So, okay. Holy moly, bro. Okay. Can you give it to me, but it's on English? Please, my guy. So this is a standard organization that was founded in 1947, right? It's compilations of set of stands of a group of experts in those specific sectors, whether it's health, transport, food and agriculture, IT-related technologies, which is where I'm currently at, energy, materials, management and service, and this is for business management and procedures and procurement. Diversity and inclusion. I don't know how you standardize diversity and inclusion. What the French stuff is this? Standards foster equitable workplace social responsibility and sustainable business practice. Oh, that makes sense, exactly. But for business practice, right? Interesting. Exactly. It's the business practice. Makes sense. But sectors like building and construction, security, safety and risk, environmental sustainability and engineering here, mechanical engineering and special technologies such as robotics, optics, and interesting. Robotics, but they don't mention that. Yeah, what the French stuff? What? Oh, if I hover that? Okay. So if I hover that and leave that for a couple seconds, mechanical engineering and special technologies such as robotics, optics, biotechnology, and etc. Right? So all of this, right? So again, a group of experts that they decide to create this set of standards across different sectors, all right? And what is relevant for me is the IT-related technologies, right? Particularly on the information security, coding, software, right? Which are the most relevant for. And it's interesting because one of the top standards is in terms of information security, cybersecurity, privacy and protection. Okay, evaluation criteria for IT, system and software engineering, life cycle profiles for very small entities, and the same for that, which is a vocabulary, and the SQL as it is. And you might have another additional as well. So on the information security is the processes and how you're going to manage that. One particular standard that I'm quite familiar is the 27001, right? Which is the updated form. And the other is on the coding languages, right? Database is one of them. Information technologies, metadata registers. The other is the markup language, right? How you describe a particular document here, and some of the programming language here in the vocabulary. So most of these standards are easy to, they are free, most of them, unless they require is, or unless they're critical, all right? Unless they are critical. So for example, if I want to look at the ECMA 262, all right? It comes from the information technology here. The JSON data interchange syntax, again, is describing at least one of them. And it's interesting because, so if I say ECMA script, so ECMA script, ECMA script programming languages, the environment and system specifications. But I don't know why they don't put it like that. So if I say ECMA 262 spec, right? So this might be the name in which the technical groups defines that. But if I want to look at the ISO, right? Okay, they have a different. Okay. So they are under a different standard here. If I remove this and say this one, exactly. But this is not what I'm looking for. It's in fact is this one. So this is not true. Unless they change that. Okay, so they change the number. Okay. So they change the number. Okay. Okay, information technology programming language, their environments and system software interface. ECMAScript, right? So, the international standards define the ECMAScript specification suites containing the ECMAScript programming language, and it is required and optional built-in libraries. So if I try to download this, right? I think I already I already have an email here. Yes. If I try to do this, I'll make a pause here. All right. So the point here is that here is finding is a set of standards that experts on that particular sectors, and whether it's health, transport, food and agriculture, IT-related technologies, building and constructions, engineer, energy and materials, and any other fields, they agree to work upon that, and they define those kind of standards. One of the most relevant in the IT related is the SQL. So this is standard, right? So when I read about that, which is something that I'm gonna do in today's video, okay, is to describe the anatomy of the SQL, right? So, well, ISO is something that I mentioned before, right? The ISC is this international electrotechnical commit, who's the founder of this was Lord Kelvin, the one who has the name for temperatures, all right? So you're starting to see the relationship of not only the technical aspect, but also the social of it, okay? And then how now both of these specs, they must adhere to the World Trade Organization, right? So that's good, because after that, and the World Trade Organizations actually they define. So the last meeting was in 1994 in Uruguay to create this set of rules in where we're going to be governed, or in which the trade will be governed worldwide. So this is the introduction, right? So here we're going to look at the scope, the normative reference, terms and definition, concepts, part of the ISO/IEC series, summarize the content of each part of the ISO series, notations and conventions using other part of the ISO/IEC 1975 series, right? Clause and annex to part of ISO/IEC 1970 series, status code, conformance, SQL summary, and the other annex section here. But I want to is just look at the first clause here, the scope. This document describes the conceptual framework using other part of the ISO/IEC 1975. series to specify the grammar of SQL and the result of processing statement. Okay, to specify the grammar of SQL and the result of processing statement in the language by an SQL implementation. So not only is the keywords the grammar, but actually what happened when it is evaluated. What is the result of that evaluation? Okay, so this is the normative reference. Question is that's it. This document also defines terms and notation using other part of the ISO 1975 series. All right. And the normative reference is this. The following documents are referenced to in the text in such a way that some or all of their content constitute requirement of this document. For dated reference, you can look at this, right? For undated reference, the latest edition of the reference document, including any amendment, applies. Okay, but in this case, it has this. ISO, I see this, information technology, ISO 7-bit code character set for information interchange. And then you have the information technology here, the database language, which is what I'm going to currently looking at. Yeah, you got it. Database language, SQL part foundations, the SQL foundations, and then you have now another spec that say call level interface, or the CLI. Interesting. The other is the persistent store model, the management of external data, object language binding, information definition schema, which is something that I didn't know what it is, routines and types using the Java programming language, XML related spec, multidimensional arrays, and property graph queries, and universal multi-octet code character set. So not only we're not going to look at this encoding character set, the ASCII, which is 7-bit, but also now an enhance of that, as well as the international string ordering and comparison, method for comparing character streams, and description of the common templates state level ordering. Okay, that's interesting. In terms and definitions, but again, this is the normative reference, right? So there are so far a couple things that we need to understand: the character encoding, the foundation of the SQL, the call level interface, or the CLI, the way to persist that data, the manage with external data, the things called object language binding, the information and definition schemas, okay, and SQL routines, and some of the documents and additional features, right? Okay, so terms and definitions. So you get all of this, right? So definitions taken from ISO IC, okay, which is another standard, okay. And this is, you have the character, member of a set of elements used for organization control, represented textual data, node 1 to entry, right? This is an identical abstract character as defined the Unicode standard, right? And the Unicode standard is made by that, right? And the definition provided in this document: atomic, incapable of subdivide, column, field of robot type, exactly, incapable of subdivide. Okay, interesting. Compilation units, segment of executable code, possibly consisting of one or more subprograms. Compilation unit, segment of executable code. possibly consisting of one or more subprograms, data type, set of representable value, descriptor, coded descriptor of the metadata of an SQL object, and then you have all of it, right? So identifiers, object by which something is identified, and it is an object. Identify as a verb, implementation defined, so instance, physical representation of a value, node 1 to entry. Interesting. Instance is the physical representation of a value. Okay, each instance is exactly one site. An instance has a data type that it is data type of its value. The null value, or the $1 billion mistake, special value that is used to indicate the absence of any data value. So object, okay, as in object here, thing that is a component of is otherwise associated with or some x and cannot exist independently of that x. Node 1 to entry. So for example, an SQL object is an object that exists only in the context of SQL. There you got it. And persistent, continuing to exist indefinitely until destroyed deliberately. Referential and cascade actions as regardless as deliberate. Actions incidental to determinations of an SQL transaction or on an SQL system are not regarded as deliberate. So property of an object, row, scope of a standard, of a name declaration, of a reference type. Okay, the sequence, ordered collection of objects that are not necessarily distinct. Site, SQL connection, association between the SQL client and the SQL server, SQL environment in which SQL data exists, and SQL statement and executed, and the implementation, the processor that processes the SQL system, statement, table, white space. And this is just, and it's not that long, right? It's not that huge glossary. Okay, interesting. Very, very interesting. It's not that extent. All right. Okay. Okay, cool. Oh. And here is what is SQL. The name SQL is correctly pronounced SQL instead of somewhat common SQL. Okay. Okay. SQL, SQL, okay, specify in parts of the ISO 97 in database language, more precisely the data sublanguage here, used to access to pseudo-relational databases that are managed by pseudo-relational database management systems. Many books and articles define SQL by parenthetically claiming that the letters stand for structured query language. While this was undoubtedly true for the original prototypes, it's not true of the standards. Okay, so when the letters appears in product names, they often being assigned this meaning by the product implementators. But users are ill-served by claims that the word structure accurately describes the language. In the SQL standard, the letters do not stand for anything at all. They are not affiliated. Okay. So in the SQL standards, the letter does not stand for anything at all. They're not they are aficionados who asserts that a letter stands for SQL query language, a recursive acronym in the traditional GNO, not Unix, and a SPARQLA. SPARQL protocol and a different language. SQL is based on, but it's not a strict implementation of the relational data of relational model. Okay, you can take a look what is a relational model. I'm not going to dive deep into this. Oh my God, I lose the reference, terms and definition, and concept. Making SQL pseudo-relational. instead of a truly relational. So there are two principal ways in which SQL break down from the relational models. The relational model requires that every relations have no duplicated rows. That is rows for which all corresponding attributes have equal values. A consequence of this requirement is that every relationship has a primary key. SQL does not enforce this requirement but provides syntax that permits application developers to enforce the requirement as needed. It's interesting, the relational model that describes that. So every relationship, that every relation have no duplicate rows. The relation model does not specify or recognize any sort of flag or other market represented here. The SQL standards define two distinct aspects of the language. A data definition language, the standards defines two distinct aspects of the language. A data definition language, known in the standard as a schema manipulation language that support the creation and destruction of database objects such as database objects such as tables, columns, and integrity constraint. And data manipulation that allows to retrieve, create, modify, and delete data. So now the standards define is two aspects of the language. Is one of that support is the creation of destruction of database objects, database things, tables, databases, so tables, columns, and integrity constraint. This is data definition language, and the other is data manipulation language that allows to read, create, modify, and delete data. This is when the CRUD operation kicks in. An especially important characteristic of the SQL is that it's declarative as opposed to procedural in nature. That is, SQL syntax and semantic allow applications writers to specify the rules by which results may be computed by an SQL system, rather than specify the algorithm by which those results must be computed. Exactly. So you don't specify is the how, you specify is what. This constructs with early database language that requires the detailed specification of a step-by-step algorithms to retrieve, filter, and format data requires by applications. By applications here, and the use of terms. And some caveats here. And also, I'm just only here reading the definition here. Okay. All right. And the use of terms here. Okay. So if you continue to read about this clause, describe concepts that are, for the most part, specified precise in other part of the ISO. SQL environment and their components. SQL environment comprises of an agent of one implementation, 0 or more SQL client models containing external invocation procedures available to the SQL agent. 0 or more authorizations, identifiers, user mappings, routines, more catalogs, or each of which contains one or more SQL schemas, 0 or more foreign server descriptor, and 0 or more foreign data wrapper descriptors. So there's a couple concepts here. And the sites, principally base tables that contain the SQL data and described by the contents of the schema here. So in this environment, you have this, an SQL agent, which calls an execution of the SQL statement, In the case of the direct invocation SQL subclass, the direction invocation SQL statement, and here you have the SQL implementations. Okay. SQL environments and their components, the anatomy of this. Got it. So you have now the SQL agents that cause the execution of the SQL statement. Okay. And SQL implementation it is implementation defined. Alternatively, it may consist of one or more compilation units. When executed, externally invoke procedure in an SQL client model. Okay, so you have now the SQL implementations of SQL clients and SQL server. Okay, so an SQL implementation is a processor that executes the SQL statement as required by the SQL agents. And SQL implementations, as perceived by the SQL agent, include one SQL client to which the SQL agent is bound and one or more SQL server. Okay, and one or more SQL server. An SQL implementation is able to conform without the allowing to have more than one SQL server to exist in one SQL environment. Because of any SQL implementation can be specified only in terms of how it executes the SQL statements, the concept denotes an installed instance of some software, which is a database management system. But again, this implementations of the SQL standards, it is made of the agent, which causes the execution of the SQL statement, and those agents is based on the implementation, right? But those implementations is the client and the server. Exactly, an SQL client is a processor perceived by the SQL agent to be part of the SQL implementations. That establish an SQL connection between itself and the SQL server and maintains a diagnostic area and other state data related to interacting behavior between itself, the SQL agent, and the SQL server. And then you have the SQL server is a processor. So an SQL client is a processor. The same for the SQL server is a processor, right? But they perceive the SQL agent to be part of the SQL implementation. And the same is to be part of the implementation. But this actually manages this. So when more and more SQL connections has been established for an SQL client, the diagnostic area is here, this. And then you have another. So each SQL server manages the SQL season taking place over the SQL connection between itself and the SQL client, execute the SQL statement received from the SQL clients, receiving and sending data as required, and maintain the state of the SQL season, including the authorization identifier searching season as it is. And then you have now clients models here. And they use user identifiers, the roles, user mappings, row mappings, and catalogs and schemes. It's a collection of SQL schema here. So they call these catalogs. Interesting. A collection of SQL schemas. Foreign server description and foreign data wrappers here. An SQL schema often reflects simple as a schema. It's a persistent name collection of descriptors. An object whose descriptor is in some SQL schema here. And you have information schema, definition schema, foreign servers and descriptor, and the tables here. Okay. So, that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.